In today's video, I'll be explaining Bloodborne's most hidden lore items. Some of these items will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about the Healing Church's origins. And one item at the end connects to Murgo in a way that'll make you question if Queen Yarnham ever actually died. But first, we need to talk about parasites, because if this theory is right, every great one in Yarnham was already dead before you ever picked up the controller, Yarnham Stone. The Yarnham Stone is a calcified relic you get from killing Queen Yarnham in the deepest chalice dungeon, and its item description straight up tells you it's her sleeping consciousness in physical form. This isn't a metaphor. The queen is dead, her body's rotting in some underground tomb, but her mind is trapped in this rock, and it still moves on its own. Getting this thing requires grinding through 4 layers of the Great Pthumeru Eyehill Chalice, which is a depth 5 dungeon that demands you've already completed multiple other dungeons just to unlock the ritual. You need materials like Bastard of Loran and Red Jelly, items that require their own separate dungeon crawls. The completion rate for chalice dungeons sits around 10 to 20%, which means most players will never even see this item exist. When you finally beat Queen Yarnham after dodging her blood attacks and dealing with her teleportation spam, she drops this stone that heals you for 25% HP with some regeneration over time. But here's where it gets weird. The description calls it a sacred heirloom, and fans have spent years debating what it actually is. The most popular theory claims it's a calcified fetus, possibly Murgo, the invisible infant you hear crying in Murgo's loft. Lithopedion is the medical term for when a fetus dies in the womb and calcifies into stone, and Bloodborne loves pulling from real medical horror. Queen Yarnham is tied to Murgo throughout the game. Her boss fight literally takes place in a blood-soaked tomb while she clutches her stomach like she's still pregnant. The stone could be the physical remnant of that stillbirth, imbued with her consciousness, because Pthumerian blood curses don't follow normal rules. The official description says her horrific consciousness stirs in unsettling motions. That's From Software confirming the stone is alive in some capacity. Players have tried everything with this item, looking for secret interactions or hidden endings, but it just heals you. No special doors unlock, no NPCs react to it, nothing. Kotaku ran an article in 2015 calling it the mysterious Bloodborne item nobody can figure out, and a decade later we're still arguing about it on Reddit. Some data miners claim it's tied to cut content about blood heirs and Pthumerian lineage, mechanics that got scrapped before launch but left this artifact as a fossil of what could have been. The stone represents everything From Software does with hidden lore. They'll make you grind for 30 hours through dungeons just to get a consumable item that raises more questions than it answers. And the fact that it references the Queen's consciousness being asleep, not dead, implies she could wake up. That's a horror concept they introduce and then never follow up on, leaving it to rot in your inventory while you wonder if using it for a heal was a waste. But if a dead queen's consciousness can live in a rock, what happens when you kill something that was never fully alive to begin with? Keep that in mind, because the next item comes from a man who lost his humanity so completely that even his skull can't remember what he used to be. Laurence's skull. The skull sitting on an altar in the research hall isn't just decoration. This is the actual head of Laurence, the first vicar of the Healing Church, the guy who kickstarted the entire blood ministration disaster that turned Yarnham into a beast-infested hellscape. And according to the item description, Laurence became the first cleric beast, meaning that massive flaming monstrosity you fight in the Old Hunters DLC used to be human. Finding this skull requires specific steps in the research hall, an area in the DLC that's already confusing enough with its rotating staircases and brain fluid-obsessed patients. You need to unlock a hidden altar by interacting with the right levers and carefully navigating the vertical maze. The skull sits there like a trophy, and picking it up gives you the item along with a description that confirms Laurence's fate. He transformed into a beast and spent his existence searching for his skull, driven by some instinctual need to find the last piece of his humanity. Even if he found it, the description says it could never restore his memories. That's tragedy, packaged into a single item. Laurence founded the Healing Church, pioneered blood ministration with Master Willem, and probably believed he was saving people. Then he turned into the exact thing he was trying to cure, lost his mind completely, and died as a beast still searching for something he couldn't understand. The skull proves that transformation into a beast isn't just physical. It erases who you were, wipes your memories, leaves you as a husk driven by base instincts. Laurence couldn't recognize his own skull even if he held it. The cleric beast boss fight in the base game takes on new meaning with this context. That first major boss thrashing around on the bridge could be any former church member who underwent the same fate, but Laurence's version in the DLC is on fire, literally burning with molten blood, like his transformation was so violent it left him in permanent agony. The fight happens in the burning Grand Cathedral, surrounded by flames that never go out, and his moveset is more aggressive and desperate than the base game cleric beast. He's still searching. Augur is still trying to find something that doesn't exist anymore. Finding this skull also connects to the Healing Church's founding sin. Laurence split from Master Willem over the use of blood versus insight, choosing to experiment with old blood from the Pthumerians instead of seeking eyes on the inside like Willem wanted. That decision created the Beast Scourge, turned Yarnham yarnham into a nightmare, and ultimately transformed Laurence himself. The skull is physical proof that the healing church's leader fell victim to his own ambition, and the church covered it up by making him a saint instead of acknowledging he died as a monster. Players found this through careful exploration, but From Software hid it behind mechanics that require you to already know the research hall's secrets. No quest marker, no NPC tells you about it directly. Just environmental storytelling and item placement. The skull sits there waiting for players who care enough to look, rewarding them with confirmation of one of Bloodborne's most tragic backstories. But Laurence's downfall was just one man's hubris. What happens when an entire species dies and leaves parasites behind? Because the next item came from something that washed up dead on a beach, and those parasites are still very much alive. Kos Parasite. You kill the Orphan of Kos, one of the hardest bosses in Bloodborne's DLC, and he drops a weapon that's literally made from parasites that lived inside his mother's corpse. The Kos Parasite is a whip-like tentacle weapon that deals arcane damage, and equipping it with the Milkweed rune transforms your character's head into a cauliflower monstrosity, covered in wriggling appendages. This isn't a normal weapon. This is you wielding the remnants of a dead Great One's internal organs. The lore here is horrific even by Bloodborne standards. Kos was a Great One whose corpse washed up on the shores of the fishing hamlet, and when the Bergenworth scholars and early hunters came to investigate, they found her insides teeming with tiny parasites. These weren't bacteria or normal organisms. The description says they were phantasms, eldritch beings that stimulate lumen woods, which are those brain plant hybrid things you see in the research hall. The scholars harvested these parasites for experiments, probably using them for early arcane research, and that violation triggered the entire hunter's nightmare. Orphan of Kos is her child, still connected to her corpse on the beach. Angren killing him lets you take the parasites as a weapon. The fight itself is brutal, with the orphan swinging his placenta like a club and screaming with every attack. He's defending his dead mother while simultaneously being born and dying at the same time, trapped in a loop of trauma. When you beat him and take the parasites, you're continuing the cycle of exploitation that created the nightmare in the first place. Equipping the weapon with milkweed changes your appearance because the parasites take over your head, transforming you into a kin, which is Bloodborne's term for humans who've ascended into eldritch beings. Your attacks become tentacle swipes and arcane bursts, and you move differently, slower but with this unsettling fluidity. It's the game letting you become the thing the healing church was trying to create. A human who evolved beyond flesh into something cosmic. Except you didn't evolve naturally, you just strapped dead god parasites to your body and called it progress. The Kos Parasite also scales with arcane stat at S tier, making it one of the best weapons for arcane builds if you invest the upgrade materials. But using it means embracing the exact philosophy that doomed the fishing hamlet. Those villagers cursed the hunters for defiling Kos, and that curse manifests as the hunter's nightmare, an endless purgatory where blood-drunk hunters kill each other forever. You're wielding the source of that curse as a weapon, which is either poetic justice or proof that players will use anything if the DPS is high enough. The parasites connect to the broader theme of Great Ones and their children. Every Great One loses its child and then yearns for a surrogate, according to the third umbilical cord descriptions. Kos lost her child when the orphan was killed, but her parasites survived, meaning parts of her still exist in a form that can be weaponized. That's the Bloodborne cycle. Gods die, their remnants get turned into tools, and those tools create new horrors. But if parasites from a dead god can grant power, what about the brain matter from a living one? Because the next item comes from something that was definitely alive when you killed it, and technically it still is. Living string. The brain of Mensis drops this when you kill it, or you can buy it from the insight shop for 10 insight after the brain dies. The description calls it a living relic left behind by a legitimate Great One, and it's required for performing high-level Chalice dungeon rituals. This isn't just lore flavor. This is a functional item tied to progression, except most players never use it because Chalice dungeons are optional content that demands materials most people don't have. The brain of Mensis is that massive, disgusting brain covered in eyes that hangs above the nightmare of Mensis, and it causes frenzy buildup just by looking at you. Frenzy is Bloodborne's madness meter, and this brain generates it passively because seeing a Great One's true form breaks human minds. You can kill it by dropping it into a pit after hitting a lever in the nightmare, and when it dies, it drops this string. The item description says the brain was lined with eyes on the inside, but they were of an evil sort, which implies not all Great One eyes grant insight the same way. Master Willem's philosophy revolved around gaining eyes on the inside to elevate the mind, and the brain of Mensis is the result of someone actually achieving that goal. Except instead of enlightenment, it became a grotesque mass that exists solely to induce madness in anyone who perceives it. The string is what's left after death, a physical strand of its existence that retains enough cosmic energy to fuel rituals that open deeper Chalice dungeons like Great Using the string for rituals ties into the Thumerian blood curse mechanics. The deepest dungeons require acquire materials from Great Ones or their remnants, meaning the Thumerians were performing these rituals long before the healing church existed. They understood how to use eldritch biology as a resource, which is probably why their entire civilization ended up cursed and trapped in underground tombs forever. The string proves that Great Ones can be harvested even after death, their bodies reduced to components for occult science. The fact that you can buy it with insight after killing the brain is interesting because insight is mechanically tied to perception and knowledge. You're trading understanding for a piece of a dead god, which fits Bloodborne's theme of knowledge leading to corruption. The more you learn, the more you see things that shouldn't exist, and eventually you start using those things as tools without questioning the cost. Players who skip Chalice dungeons never interact with Living String, which means they miss the entire layer of lore about Thumerian rituals, and how the healing church's blood experiments were just repeating ancient mistakes. From Software hid this connection behind optional content that requires grinding, ensuring only dedicated players would piece together the full scope of Yarnham's history. But if a brain can remain alive as string, what happens when you summon just part of something that never fully left? Keep that question in mind, because the next item lets you call on a Great One without ever seeing the whole thing. Augur of Ebrietas. This hunter tool sits in a chest on the first floor of the lecture hall, and using it summons a cluster of cosmic tentacles that burst from the ground to attack enemies. The description says it's a remnant of eldritch truth encountered at Bergenwerth, and it partially summons abandoned ebrietas. Not fully summoned, partially. You're calling on fragments of a Great One that exists somewhere else, using her as a weapon without her consent or awareness. Ebrietas is the daughter of the cosmos, the Great One chained up in the upper cathedral ward, and she's connected to the choir's research into making contact with higher beings. The choir was a branch of the healing church that focused on arcane methods instead of blood ministration, and they kept ebrietas as a subject for experiments. She's docile when you find her, mourning over a corpse, and only attacks when provoked. The Augur proves that even before the choir imprisoned her, Bergenwerth scholars were using her power for tools. The tentacles themselves are phantasms, the same type of entities that lived inside Kos and stimulate lumenwoods. This connects the Augur to the fishing hamlet lore, suggesting that phantasms are a universal component of Great Ones, something that exists in their biology across different species. Using the Augur means channeling ebrietas' power through these phantasms, summoning them temporarily to deal arcane damage and knock back enemies. Finding the Augur requires you to unlock the lecture hall, which is a hidden area accessed through specific doors in the Nightmare Frontier or after killing Rom. You need the key from defeating the hunter in Yahargul, and even then the chest is tucked away on a lower floor that players might miss if they're rushing through. From Software placed it deliberately in the lecture hall, because that area represents Bergenwerth's failed academic pursuit of cosmic knowledge. The building is full of students who turned into slime monsters from too much insight, proof that seeking truth led to degeneration. The Augur's low stat requirements make it accessible for early arcane builds, but its true significance is lore-based. It proves that Bergenwerth and later the choir were exploiting Great Ones as resources, treating them like batteries for supernatural power. Ebrietas is abandoned, meaning other Great Ones left her behind or she'd lost something that made her whole. Using the Augur means tapping into that abandonment, weaponizing her cosmic existence for your benefit. This item also ties into the theme of partial contact. Nox the choir's motto was, "Let us sit about and speak feverishly," chatting into the wee hours of new ideas of the higher plane, which sounds academic, but really means they were obsessed with communing with Great Ones. The Augur is the result of that obsession, a tool that grants limited access to something beyond human comprehension without ever achieving full understanding. But if you can summon parts of a Great One with a tool, what if you wore something that made you the antenna? Because the next item isn't just lore, it's a piece of equipment that literally restrains your will to make contact easier. Tonsil stone. You get this from Patches the Spider after lighting specific red lanterns post-Forbidden Woods, and it's described as a latticed, deformed rock with odd gravitational force. The item description even gives you a hint, telling you to step lightly round to the right of the Great Cathedral. Following that instruction while holding the stone gets you grabbed by an invisible amygdala and teleported to the lecture hall, revealing that these multi-armed eldritch beings are everywhere in Yarnham, watching constantly. The name Tonsil stone is a reference to the brain's amygdala, the region associated with fear and emotional processing. In real anatomy, tonsil stones are calcified debris that forms in throat crevices, but Bloodborne uses the term to tie the item to brain anatomy and cosmic perception. Holding the stone grants you temporary awareness of amygdalas, which are Great Ones that exist on a different perceptual plane until you gain enough insight to see them naturally. This mechanic reveals one of Bloodborne's smartest horror tricks. Amygdalas are literally hanging off buildings and clinging to cathedral walls from the very start of the game, but you can't see them until you meet insight thresholds or use the tonsil stone. They're not invisible because of magic. They're invisible because your character's mind isn't developed enough to perceive higher dimensions. The stone forces that perception early, acting as a shortcut to cosmic awareness. Getting it requires talking talking to Patches, an NPC hidden behind red lanterns that most players ignore because they blend into the environment. Patches himself is a callback to previous From Software games, always a trickster character. But in Bloodborne, he's a spider-human hybrid who gives you this stone if you follow his cryptic instructions. Missing this interaction means missing the entire lecture hall area until much later, or possibly forever. The lore implication is that Tonsil stones are gifts from higher beings, items that Great Ones distribute to humans they find worthy or interesting. The description's reference to stepping right of the cathedral is the amygdala telling you where to go, which means they're intelligent enough to communicate through objects and patient enough to wait for humans to figure it out. That's scarier than if they were just mindless monsters. The stone also connects to the theme of eyes and perception that runs throughout Bloodborne. Master Zillim says, "To line your brain with eyes, the choir seeks to elevate minds through communion, and the Tonsil stone grants artificial sight of beings that exist outside normal reality." It's a physical manifestation of insight as a mechanic, proof that knowledge can be an object you carry instead of something you earn. But awareness of Great Ones is one thing. What if you wanted to become a receptor for their voices? Because the next item is headgear designed specifically to contact beings from the dream, and wearing it means giving up control of your own will. Mensis cage. Mikolash drops this after you beat him, and it's described as a hexagonal iron cage that restrains the will of the self, acting as an antenna that facilitates contact with Great Ones of the dream. This isn't symbolic. The cage literally suppresses your consciousness to make your brain a receiver for cosmic transmissions. The School of Mensis wore these during their ritual to contact Murgo, and it worked so well they trapped themselves in a nightmare forever. The design is a geometric iron frame that fits over your head like a helmet, but instead of protecting you, it restricts you. Wearing it in-game increases your discovery stat, which affects item drop rates, but the lore function is far more sinister. The Mensis scholars believed that restraining their individual will would make them receptive to higher guidance from Great Ones, essentially turning themselves into empty vessels for divine inspiration. They got their wish, but the contact they made wasn't enlightenment, it was Murgo and the nightmare that consumed them. Mikolash himself is trapped running through a maze in the nightmare of Mensis, babbling about cause and insight while wearing his cage. He's insane, stuck in a loop of his own ritual's aftermath, and killing him just resets the cycle because he's already dead in the real world. His physical body is a dried corpse, sitting in a chair in Yahar'gul, which means the version you fight is purely his consciousness trapped in the nightmare, kept alive by the cage's connection to Murgo. The hexagonal shape isn't random. Hexagons appear throughout Bloodborne in relation to the Thumerians and cosmic geometry, from the patterns in Chalice dungeons to the symbols on ritual altars. The Mensis cage uses that geometry to create a framework that channels specific frequencies or dimensions, targeting the dream realm where Murgo exists. It's technology and occultism merged into headgear, which is peak Bloodborne aesthetic. Wearing the cage in gameplay is mostly a fashion choice for players who want to look like lunatics. But it represents the School of Mensis's ultimate failure. They wanted to birth a Great One or commune with one, and they succeeded in contacting Murgo, but the cost was their sanity and freedom. The cage proves that direct contact with Great Ones isn't transcendence, it's surrender of self, and the School of Mensis chose that willingly. The item also connects to the brain of Mensis, which was probably the result of the ritual. The scholars might have fused their consciousnesses together using the cages as conduits, creating that massive brain as a collective entity meant to serve Murgo. That brain's evil eyes suggest the fusion went wrong, producing something monstrous instead of enlightened. The cage is the tool that enabled that fusion, making it responsible for one of Bloodborne's most disturbing transformations. But restraining your will to contact dreams is just preparation. What if you needed a tool that didn't transform you but instead forced transformation onto others? Because the final item is a weapon designed for execution, and it spins. Logarius' wheel. This sits in a secret room in Cainhurst Castle, and it's described as a torture device, fashioned by Logarius to drain blood from vile bloods during executions. The wheel transforms from a normal stake weapon into a spinning grinder that coats itself in your own blood for buff damage. Using it means you're wielding the executioner's primary tool for killing the vampire-esque nobles of Cainhurst, a weapon designed specifically to make death slow and agonizing. Logarius was the leader of the executioners, a group of healing church fanatics who hunted vile bloods as heretics for their blood rights and allegiance to Queen Annalise. The executioners believed they were cleansing corruption, but their methods were pure cruelty, and the wheel exemplifies that philosophy. It doesn't just kill, it grinds and drains, turning execution into spectacle. Finding it requires navigating Cainhurst's optional area, then locating a hidden room that most players miss, because the castle is already a maze of dead ends and illusory walls. The wheel's transformation is grotesque. In its normal state, it's a spiked wooden stake attached to a handle, but the weapon art lets you spin it like a medieval angle grinder while it drinks your HP to deal arcane damage. Your character holds it overhead and advances slowly while it whirls, blood spraying everywhere, the enemies getting shredded. It's impractical as weapons go, but thematically, it's perfect for representing the Executioner's zealotry. The lore significance comes from the Executioner Vileblood War, which is one of Bloodborne's most detailed faction conflicts. The Vilebloods harvested blood dregs from their victims to offer to Queen Annalise, believing it would grant them immortality or ascension. The Executioners saw this as blasphemy and launched a crusade that ended with Cainhurst destroyed and Annalise barely surviving. Logarius sealed himself outside her chamber as an eternal guard, and his wheel became a relic of that holy war. Using the wheel means picking a side in a conflict that's already over. The Executioners won. The Vilebloods are extinct except for Annalise, but the wheel still functions exactly as Logarius intended, and it still drains blood, still spins with the same mechanical ruthlessness. Players who join the Executioner Covenant under Alfred get additional context, watching him crush Annalise into paste with his fists in a cutscene that proves the Executioner's righteousness was really just sanctioned violence. The wheel also has unique animations and movesets that make it stand out from other strength weapons. The rally mechanic, which lets you regain HP by attacking after taking damage, synergizes with the wheel's self-damage transformation, creating a risk-reward loop where you sacrifice health for power then earn it back through aggression. It's mechanically elegant and thematically brutal, rewarding players who commit to the weapon's philosophy of blood sacrifice. From a lore perspective, the wheel connects to the broader theme of blood as currency and corruption. The Vilebloods used blood dregs for immortality, the Healing Church used old blood for healing, and the Executioners used blood drainage for punishment. Every faction in Yarnham has a relationship with blood, and the wheel is the Executioner's answer to that obsession, a tool that weaponizes the very substance everyone else worships. Finding it in Cainhurst also emphasizes how From Software rewards exploration. Cainhurst itself is entirely optional, accessed only through a secret item and location that players can miss entirely. The wheel hides inside that optional area behind additional secrets, meaning it's triple-gated content that exists for players who explore every corner. It's From Software saying that if you want the full story of the Executioner Vileblood War, you need to work for it. These 8 items represent Bloodborne's approach to storytelling through objects. From Software didn't put this lore in cutscenes or NPC monologues. They buried it in item descriptions, boss drops, and secret locations, trusting players to piece together the narrative themselves. The Yarnham Stone proves queens can die but never rest. Laurence's skull shows transformation erases identity. The Coast parasite weaponizes dead gods. Living String turns brains into materials. The Augur summons fragments of abandoned beings. The Tonsil stone grants artificial sight. The Mensis cage trades will for contact. Logarius's wheel makes execution an art form. Every one of these items is optional. You can beat Bloodborne without touching a single chalice dungeon, without finding Laurence's altar, without fighting the orphan, without wearing the cage. But if you do find them, they reveal layers of horror that turn Yarnham from a beast-plagued city into a cosmic graveyard where gods die, scholars go mad, and blood corrupts everything it touches. That's the genius of Bloodborne's hidden lore. It doesn't force you to understand. It just leaves the pieces scattered across nightmares and dungeons, waiting for players obsessive enough to collect them all. And if you did collect them, you learned that From Software built an entire game where the main story is just the surface. The real narrative is in the items nobody finds, the bosses most players skip, the descriptions that require a wiki to decode. Bloodborne respects players who dig deeper by giving them answers that are somehow more disturbing than the questions. You wanted to know what the Yarnham Stone is? It's a dead queen's consciousness in rock form. You wanted to know why Laurence became a beast? Because blood ministration was doomed from the start. You wanted to understand the fishing hamlet curse? Because violating a dead god has consequences that last forever. These items proved that Bloodborne's lore isn't just backstory, it's the actual story, hidden in plain sight, waiting for hunters who refuse to accept easy answers. From Software made a game where beating the final boss is just the beginning, where the real endgame is reading item descriptions in Chalice dungeons at 3 AM, trying to figure out if the Yarnham Stone is Murgo's corpse or something worse. And the fact that we're still debating it a decade later means they succeeded. If you enjoyed this video and want to see Dark Souls' most disturbing moments explained, click the video on the screen.